Well, hey there, y'all. Just a quick reminder, this podcast's for fun and information only. It ain't medical advice, and the views are ours, not our employers.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of What the Health. We appreciate the feedback we've been getting so far and look forward to another conversation today. So just to remind listeners, I'm Brian Bost. I'm an internal medicine and pediatric hospitalist who's done some other various things in my clinical roles. And with me is my co-host, Dr. Nessa Meshkaty.
Hi, good to be here.
Again, I think part of the goal of this is just to have fun in conversation. So hitting a range of topics, and some of this is applicable for our physician colleagues, but also conversations that are just hopefully kind of around the topics of medicine. So right up Nessa's specialty, and a follow-up conversation I thought that was really interesting to the carbapenem resistant organisms in the past was I was getting caught up on some reading, and I came across an article in Society of Hospital Medicine that actually went through a little bit of the history of antimicrobial stewardship. And it had some great history and some fun lessons that I'll point out in the article. But Nessa, lead us first through like what antimicrobial stewardship is and why we should care, and bring us to that.
It sounds like very fancy and formal, but it's really just a group of people behind the scenes that are looking at the usage of antibiotics, mostly in your local hospital. So it really affects everyone, but also in clinics. But, we're both hospital docs, so I can speak to the hospital end. But yeah, it's looking at the antibiotics and making sure that the patient needs them and what dose they're taking, how long they're taking it for, and whether or not it's needed. Because as one of the articles mentioned, 20 to 50%, we don't know the exact number, of antibiotic usage in the hospital is probably not necessary. But also sepsis, or getting a severe infection enough to be hospitalized, is one of the main reasons for being admitted to the hospital. So it's a complex topic.
Right. So for somebody, say grandma's hospitalized with pneumonia, what is happening in the background from antimicrobial stewardship that the patient and their family are never going to see?
In the background, unbillable is a group of people, usually an ID doctor, a microbiologist, and a pharmacy specialist in infectious disease, working together to get a feel for if grandma needs that antibiotic, but also what is circulating in our hospital and in our community on a local level. And we're able to know what's circulating and what antibiotic is better based on the patterns of the microbes in our community. So we really look at relationships. And I think that's the beauty. We look at the relationship between the microbe and the patient, the relationship between the doctor and the patient, and the whole picture.
Right. So, and I think this is a great conversation because, again, what are some of the safeguards that have in the system? From my perspective as a hospitalist, while I'm know empirically what antibiotics I probably should be using. Well, grandma is here with pneumonia. I know that I'm going to choose this antibiotic based on either IDSA guidelines or chest guidelines or standards of care. But what the antimicrobial stewardship team would do in the background is say, wow, we're seeing some changing local resistance, and this is no longer our preferred first line. And that's the conversations that I like to have. Occasionally in the background, I will also be contacted by antimicrobial stewardship who will let me know that they don't think I'm using the right antibiotic. And this is, again, made with microbiologists, infectious disease pharmacologists, and infectious disease doctors. And I think, yes, as this article points out, it was shocking to me to see, as much as I feel I'm a closet infectious disease doctor, that 20 to 50% of antibiotics used in the hospital are wrong, but also associated with the 20% risk of adverse effects. So for our listeners, to just give us a 100-year overview, I thought it was interesting. Alexander Fleming actually developed penicillin in 1928 and published his first paper on it in 1929. And I think one of the things that was shocking to me the most was that there was a British bacteriologist who actually started to document initial resistance to penicillin in the 1940s. And so she was seeing strains of Staphylococcus that were then resistant to penicillin. And I think it was interesting for me to see that historically, like, this problem started 20 years after the original antibiotic. How new, like, in your training, was antimicrobial stewardship well established, or has that happened since we finished our training 5 years ago?
The term antimicrobial stewardship is, I think, new-ish, but the idea that there is a microbe and then a medicine working for it, and that relationship has been studied for a long time. Because if you look at the pressure that you put on the microbe when you're giving the antibiotic, it changes the behavior of the microbe. So we can say, did we know about it then? Did we talk about it the way we talk about it now? Probably not. But did that doctor that you bring up, did she know?
Right.
And she did, clearly. So
Right.
I think the key is that it's an art and a science. So, and that things are evolving. So basically, you might test in the lab, it's a staphylococcus that's sensitive to penicillin at one point. But then if you give it penicillin, then the microbe learns to be resistant.
Right.
So it's about relationships again.
Right. So I'm going to label this a what the health with the double LTH. And I'm going to label it for this reason. While I know that I, as a physician, sometimes can get a little bit frustrated when I'm being told I can or can't, do and prescribe, I grew up in the culture where there were antibiotics I could not prescribe unless I had an infectious disease, specialist like yourself approve. And that feels very pedantic sometimes. But ironically, what I have found is these antibiotic classes I hardly ever use, because for me, they've been the third line. And if I need to use them, I'm going to call you, literally going to call you. And so I think that, the public should know that we continue on this path of emerging organisms that show resistance, but there are actually systems in the background that are trying to alleviate that.
Well, and also I want to say it does feel like a little bit like policing, where we police different prescribing behaviors and habits. I think when it's done in that way, it's not successful.
Yeah.
It's more, if nothing done in a like hierarchical way is really going to get buy-in, especially in the hospital. I think the other way is to inspire people to know how important these interventions and these risks are of giving antibiotics unnecessarily, and that we all have shared values, which is patient. So when we do it that way and it becomes more educational in an inspiring way, like, let's work together.
Right.
I'm nerding out on the microbiology, and this community, you shouldn't be using that. You should be using this, doing it in a different way. I'm not saying I always had grace in doing that, but I think the idea is if we could just all understand the importance, so we can reduce the risk of future resistance, or at least minimize. I don't think we'll reduce the risk. Minimize, because there aren't enough antibiotics in development.
Right.
So
Right.
because all of our actions affect what's happening in the ecosystem.
Absolutely. And I think that's a perfect way to summarize that. So I similarly, the same day, was thrilled to read this article, which also is in the Washington Post, that talked about the gut microbiome. And so I think we had proposed a question of what data does not exist. Have there been head-to-head competitions or studies? So I was somewhat thrilled to read this because it was the next logical step. But I'm going to label this a what the health, HEALTH, just from the get-go, so people know we're moving on to a positive topic. But the statistic to me that really jumped out in this article was that the probiotic and prebiotic industry is valued at $60 billion a year. Yes. So this article to me was what we continue to have conversations about, which is the importance of the gut microbiome.
Yes, exactly. I think unfortunately people market just about everything these days.
Right.
And so it becomes hard through the noise to know what is good or bad. But like we've been saying over and over again, if we have healthy input and good nutrition habits, at least as the bare minimum. That's a good starting point. And whether or not you need supplements or other things, that would be later.
Right. And I think one of my favorite parts of this article is, in the conversation last week, the data and the fancy graphics show how that probiotic is important for the gut barrier. And what this article really says is if you go back to foods that are not ultra processed and you go to the things that people are afraid to eat, the good starches, that really what these do is in the dietary breakdown of fiber by the microbiomes in the gut, they make a short chain fatty acid. And that short chain fatty acid is actually one of the things that's important for our gut barrier. And it also reduces inflammation as opposed to substituting the processed, so the whole grain bread versus the white bread that I grew up on. Actually, we have to deconstruct the messaging that, oh, this is a carb, this is bad. This is good insoluble fiber that actually helps to protect our gut.
Yes, and in circling back to why it's important to preserve the gut bacteria is if you're hospitalized or not hospitalized, is it impacts your mood, your weight, your immune system. And so if you're disturbing it, whether it's by taking antibiotics or taking other factors that disturb it, aka processed food. You guys call it food. Some people call it food. I don't know what it is. If you take those things and they affect the gut flora, it's the same. So like the ins and outs. I always talk about know your ins and outs and how it's important to, if you inflame the gut, everybody knows it as the second brain or like your instinct. So there's other stuff going on there and there's other connections to the rest of the system.
Right. Absolutely. And I think, that is hugely important. And I think also just we're learning more about that connection you talk about, how our gut feels is actually related to so much more of how we feel overall. One of my other favorite lines in here, and this goes along with the book I'm currently reading by a former head of the FDA, is that, when we look at the GLP-1 pharmaceutical, explosion, fiber is the natural GLP. I remember back to a friend of mine in medical school, and we were at lunch one day, and she just awkwardly said, I'm really trying to eat a lot of fiber. And I think we all just stopped and looked and were so quizzed. And I don't know why that still sticks in my brain 25 years later, 5 years. But, she was right? So, and I think that is why when we try to, again, deconstruct these health messages, fiber and carbs have a big overlap, but these are the things that give us good satiety in our food. And I think, I've been trying to, since reading this book, be mindful every day of where is the fiber every day in my meal. And honestly, there are times where I have to change my eating patterns to make sure that I have, some lentils or some legumes or some of these foods that I'm actually learning to cook with and use more.
Yeah. Luckily, I tend towards fiber heavy foods. I love beans and nuts and seeds and veggies and fruits. But yes, I think you touched on an important point, which is the level of fullness. And I think that's been a big practice for me personally, is to know or to get to know your body a little bit better, to know when it's not full, and then stop eating at 80% full, which is a really, really challenging thing to keep practicing, but it makes sense. And it's because kind of what you mentioned earlier, when you're 80% full, your body won't be overburdened and the systems will be operating at a more optimal level. If you get 100%, it might just be a little bit too much and things are backed up.
Right. If our viewers think that you are waxing poetically about the foods that you eat, I can show anybody your text message chain to me, because oftentimes when you're cooking your lunch or your dinner, or I'm on shift at the hospital looking at what's on my plate, I'm still getting a little pains of guilt here and there. Other things I loved about this article, again, a recurring message that is all calories are not equal, right? And again, I think mentioned a little bit last time, but this references, again, the data that shows that natural foods and getting away from ultra processed foods really are helpful in that you can do head-to-head competitions which show that when you're having natural foods as opposed to ultra processed foods, you can actually have higher calorie intake and actually still lose weight. And then what I loved, there were just great tips about, again, small changes, and looking at a meal a day instead of having, your cereal out of the box, have some oats and some berries and experiment and learn to make it fun. So I think, anytime, that my biggest struggle as a physician is every time I want to say, hey, this is what you need to do. If I don't give a practical tip to do it, blowing smoke up my own, you know what.
Yes. Also, I think we were so trained to not take care of ourselves. Meanwhile, we're in a position to kind of guide other people on how to take care of themselves. And that tension is, what we're facing now. And so I think practicing not only for your own health, but also so that you can practice, experiment, have fun, and, inspire someone again.
Right.
Because it feels like we're moved away from the, prescription, like hierarchy model, paternal.
Absolutely.
Model.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that article was, don't outsource your health to a capsule, right? Eat good, nutritious food. So I'm going to, one last nutrition story. I feel like we've come out very nutritious heavy. This is, I think, a constant theme that you and I are working on in our daily lives. So we'll ebb and flow. This article that I saw pop up on MSN was just outstanding to see how the governor of California has created has brought to legislation the bill that is actually phasing out ultra processed foods from school meals. This gets a what the health with the HEALTH.
Yes, I'm so excited. It feels like we kind of are in the consequence phase of the choices that we made in the past. And so, in California, we have such fresh everything produce. So there's really no excuse.
Right. And I think, the important thing that I appreciate that this called out, I mean, we know that in all the books that you'll see on the shelves talk about manipulation of food, the complex relationship between the agriculture industry, between government subsidies, between marketing, to changing demographic roles, in households, to, getting away from food as a communal cooking event and a time to be with your family, to, hey, it's just a chore to get done. And I feel like there's such a complex history there that I love the fact that this got bipartisan support in California, that the health starting at the fundamental level. And I remember vividly that the delicious pizza in the cafeteria, like it influenced my flavor profile up until like last week.
Yeah. Yeah. Chicken fried steak.
Right. So,
the tray of food that didn't look like food.
Right. So, I love this. It reminds me of also hearing the goal that Jamie Oliver had to change school lunches in Britain and, take it back to real health and real foods. Yeah, so that kind of ends our nutrition segment. This came across my radar as well, and this is another very pertinent topic. And this is an article in Nature Communications about creative experiences and the brain clocks. I will be open and honest up front because anyone who knows me is watching this will know that not only do I not have any great creative natural talents, you were doing gel printing a weekend ago. We have a very amazing pediatrician colleague of ours in Santa Rosa who is a musician. We have multiple friends who are great at equine, sports, and I'm not entirely sure, so I've been struggling. So I loved this story about just how important it is for us to have these creative outlets for our brain health.
Yes, definitely. I think it has played a really big role for me. Just imagination and play changes the wiring of your brain. And
For sure.
I think for the
Right. For sure. I have to say the article was a little bit of a slug for me to get through. There's some amazing graphs and diagrams, but I think just to distill it down, medicine has the ability to look at, EEG and monitoring your brain waves and know what part of your brain are stimulated, as well as using what's called a functional MRI. So it's an MRI where they're seeing different areas of the brain light up as you do things that are improving your cognitive capacity. And so, when they looked at anything from video gamers to, musicians to, people who are working hard to creatively cook or, arts and ballet, that these continue to stimulate areas of the brain. And part of the study was taking people who weren't doing those and having them undergo some of these and look at the way the brain was being stimulated to offset our future cognitive decline or concerns.
I love that these studies are coming out and they're looking at ways we can increase our gray matter.
Right.
Because I think we're looking for new ways to do that. And if anything, art, music, or any of that creative stuff can do that, then why not?
Yes. So to the friend of mine who's just picked up the violin late in life, the struggle to continue and to learn it and go forth is offsetting dementia risk. So I applaud you to continue that. So just to wrap up, as I think we've kind of been doing, just some parts of gratitude in our life recently. This is a photo of the harvest, the night after the harvest sunrise that I took. It had been kind of a stressful day on shift. And so I was lucky enough to capture this on my evening walk. And definitely, again, we talked about just the reset and need for a walk. It was very, very relaxing.
Rural medicine at
right.
its finest.
Right, absolutely. And this is a photo from your cornfield. Can I call it a cornfield?
It's a little corn area. It's the first time I'm growing corn, and I just think that they are hilarious characters.
I love it.
I took a couple days ago.
I love it. So, well, thank you for joining us on this journey. I think we've had a couple of topics that have dominated. We've got some interesting topics lined up. We have our first guest speaker coming up soon. And again, we want you to join us for a conversation. What do friends who are physicians kind of banter and talk about? It's not all about the gut microbiome. We've got some topics coming up related to, what is life in medicine these days? How are we remaining engaged? And what does that mean for us? What does that mean for the next generation of physicians? And we look forward to having you on that journey. So, Nessa, any parting thoughts or questions from you?
No, it's
awesome.
been fun.
It's been fun. So thanks everyone for the feedback. Send us questions for bonus episodes like you saw recently. And we look forward to you guys continuing with us.
All right, now, that's a wrap for today's show. You can find us at www.whatthehellth.org or on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and like and subscribe to our show. Remember, this podcast's for information and entertainment only, not medical advice. The views you heard are ours alone, not our employers. Y'all take care now and stay healthy out there.